of the foundations of normative and important and rational processes that every American relies on.
So that's what we're going to get for the next 2 years, Rahima, this destructive show?
There are a lot of people who hope not, but the reality is reality bites. Here we are. And there's so many people who I know who are in the education wheelhouse, and they're embarrassed, and they're disappointed, and they're sad because there's a lot to talk about. We rank 22 out of 27 developed countries in education, and yet we think we're at the top. We're down near the bottom. Why is that happening? We just had a nation's report card come out that said our kids are not doing well, and the pandemic devastated kids. We lost something 20 to 30 years worth of education progress in just 2 years. We're about to next year lose $124 billion that the federal government had appropriated for recovery from the pandemic. It's going to be gone. But experts say we're going to need billions more and more years to bring our kids back up to where they need to be. And where are they? So just this one thing, we have in one city, one great city in America, children lost 50% in the 4th grade of math proficiency. And what does that mean? Only 3% of 4th graders in the great city of Detroit are proficient in math. And what was it before the pandemic? It was 6%. How are we going to be a great nation going forward if in one of the major cities of this country, the children are so ill prepared? But here's what people are talking about. Who lives in Detroit? In the city of Detroit, who's going to those public schools? Mostly black and brown children who have been underserved for decades. Didn't just happen. And why isn't anybody talking about what's happening to them? Should they continue to be left behind?
And here we are, we've got the Treasury Secretary today starting to prepare us. They may have to take extraordinary measures to address this debt limit. They may end up cutting social services. That's what we're going to end up?
Well, the debt ceiling thing, which has become, instead of a rare way to gum up things, has become their only option of today's Republican Party, and they're gonna play it however they play it when it comes up in November, and presumably we'll get through again as we have in the last times. But it's the only thing they have, and I think we have to. I mean, the hopeful news is, the good news is that we have a Senate that the Republicans don't control. We have an executive branch the Republicans don't control. So the House is delimited. They can shout. They can investigate the government. They can impeach the housing HHS secretary. None of that is going to go anywhere. And meanwhile, the Senate can keep confirming more judges than has been confirmed in any 2-year period, which they've done in the last 2 years, for the next 2 years, and get that business of government done. So there is, I mean, as grotesque a circus as the Republican House is going to make Congress, the actual damage beyond the debt ceiling that they can do is limited, and I don't think will politically work for them. Yes, their small base will be, oh yeah, good, look at Jim Jordan. But as they, for instance, did this week, commit to massive budget cuts, which of course can only mean massive Social Security and Medicare cuts, they're on the road to further implosion of the Republican Party politically.
See, that's exactly what I don't get, right? From a political strategy perspective, how does it work for them to make moves to cut Social Security, to hurt Medicare? Last I checked, those senior citizens whose votes they love in Florida, they don't want their Social Security touched.
Well, of course, these Republicans that we're really talking about are living in ruby red districts, right? So they're worried about a challenge from the right. But this is part of the second part of the insurrection, right? Now we're taking it into the House. They are anti-government. They want to shut it down. I would imagine if Vegas said over under 3 shutdowns in the next 2 years, I'm going to bet over, right? That's what we're looking at. And it's all these posturing bills that you talked about. None of these things are going to get through the Senate. We're going to attack the IRS. We're going to attack the federal government. We're going to attack immigrants. None of these things are going to get through the Senate. So it's just posturing. It's just stuff they can go on Fox News. They can go back to their ruby red districts and say, look what we did. Look, we stuck it to Joe Biden. We stuck it to Chuck Schumer. This isn't actually governing. This is just posturing, looking like governing.
Then who are going to be the lawmakers that stand up for the things that we need? Education is the perfect example. It doesn't always have the biggest, strongest, wealthiest lobby out there, but it needs it.
But you know what? It's an interesting thing. I went and I looked at one of what were some of the questions that were on the polls in the midterm election. I didn't hear about it, but education was in the top 10. And what it says to me is I don't know what questions we're asking people when we go out and do these polls, but every single person in this country who has children did not have them and say, I want you to be a bum living in a cardboard box under the bridge. That's not what they said when they gave birth to their children. They said, I want you to flourish and thrive and do well.
I want you to have opportunity.
Yes, and so they're thinking about education, even though if they're asked, well, what's, as bread, those issues, economy, abortion, gas prices, all those things are important, but so is education. So who's going to run the country? Right?
Yeah,
who's going to run the country if our kids aren't educated?
Who's the adult in the House? There is no adult in the House. It's certainly not Kevin McCarthy. He gave away all his power. Certainly not going to be Matt Gaetz, right? It's not, none of these people are willing to stand up and let's deal with the issues that America really needs. The debt ceiling, this is going to become a major problem. The House will shut down. All the fears that we have of Republicans being unable to govern, we're going to see this all happen.
Yeah, but Republicans who claim they're pro-business, guess who isn't going to like this? The business community.
The entire business community. You're going to have this specter of the U.S. government not being able to service its own debt in the same way that a household would be told, look, you just can't pay your mortgage this month, and then see how you'll do with that. There is about $31.4 trillion in debt the federal government has to deal with. It keeps the markets greased. It keeps the business of the government functioning, and these guys are playing with fire. And every time they've done this in recent years, it's created a cataclysm. They've had to back away from it, and that, I think, is, as Curtis pointed out, once their clown rodeo starts really gunning up, they're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. The first time
if there's no adult in the room to pull them in, then they won't.
Well, it'll have to be their voters. I mean, that was the last time. This happened twice when Obama was president. And each time it got up to the point where voters had to scream loudly enough that Republicans worried about what was happening back in their home districts. It'll have to get to that point. The first time it happened was during Eisenhower's administration. And it was this reaction against Eisenhower wanting to build the national highway system, which was a massively important infrastructure program that was good for the economy. And somehow that idea now that public spending is a public good has gotten chewed up in Republican fanaticism.
Kurt, Republicans are very excited about the idea of investigating Joe Biden on a number of things, but most specifically, this classified documents issue. How will they make the argument, let's investigate Joe Biden, but not make the argument, let's investigate Donald Trump?
Well, that'll be hard. And what they'll say is the Department of Justice is already doing the work of investigating Donald Trump, and we're just trying to even up the scales. Of course, people have spent the day criticizing Merrick Garland for appointing a special prosecutor to look into the Biden things, but he's trying to, in his way, in his earnest way, I think, trying to prevent the Republicans from going to town on just exactly that. So, I always had my doubts, frankly, about the political and public desire to prosecute Donald Trump over the documents, as obviously criminal as it was. And so this will, in a kind of optic political way, I think, make it even harder, if not at all, make it harder in a legal way. And that's what they'll do. But all this investigation stuff, it will have no consequence.
Right.
They will have no consequence on politics. It will have no consequence on policy. And you can say what you will about the January 5th committee, but it moved needles here and there, and provided evidence to the Department of Justice as well. So this will do nothing.